Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, once again, back into the fifth dimension. It is I, your host, HMK, and today we are going to dive deep, not into the darkness, not into the noise, not into the depths, but we shall dive into the sky. That is the Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. You know, a lot of people do consider The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword to be a dark horse within the Zelda series, but I'm going to tell you right now, without a shadow of a doubt, up until Breath of the Wild, where Ocarina of Time was legit my favorite Zelda game of all time. And then Breath of the Wild came along and took that spot and shifted Ocarina of Time down to number 2. But before then, it was Ocarina of Time number 1. And number 2 was indeed Skyward Sword. So right now, as it stands, Skyward Sword is my third favorite Zelda game, the third best Zelda game in my opinion of all time. We are going to be diving deep into the advent of Skyward Sword and its legacy. But one thing you need to understand about the Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword when it comes to how different it is compared to what say you Ocarina of Time, and in that sense, A Link to the Past. It was different from Majora's Mask. It was different from The Wind Waker. It was definitely different from Twilight Princess. Why? Because those games followed what the community perceived to be an archaic Zelda formula. And then they cried out to the heavens, to the word of God itself, Nintendo, in order to reformat the Zelda formula for the next latest and greatest Zelda game, which turned out to be Skyward Sword. And Skyward Sword is a direct product of that cry to the heavens in order to shake up and reshape the Zelda formula. And in my opinion, it did wonders for Skyward Sword. Sure, it did borrow a lot from the Metroid series, but it did work out in the end overall when it comes to the game of Skyward Sword. Because right now, as it stands, Skyward Sword is indeed so far one of the best Legend of Zelda stories to date. If you guys haven't played Skyward Sword, do yourself a favor. Grab a Wii U. You can find Wii U's pretty fun and dandy. Make sure you get a Wii Motion Plus for your Wii Pro controller and play Skyward Sword. That game is a gem. But when it comes to the legacy that Skyward Sword left behind, a lot of people thought it was too different. A lot of people thought it was too wildly out there when it comes to the Legend of Zelda series. Although it was the perceived notion of the Zelda formula in order for it to be changed that led to the birth of Skyward Sword, they didn't like that direction because, you know, when it comes to the Legend of Zelda, they always perceive it as open world or pseudo open world. But for the case of Skyward Sword, it worked very well because there was a lot of backtracking. There was a lot of backtracking when it comes to Skyward Sword that really harkens back to Metroid Prime, all that good jazz. And for Skyward Sword, it worked. It allowed you to go back to the various areas of Eldin, Faron, and Lanayru. And in Lanayru, Lanayru had a lot of secrets to it. Oh, dandy, fandy. It was great. And it allowed you in order to get a great intimate adventure in which Link, I feel Link, you know, forget what you know about Majora's Mask, forget what you know about Breath of the Wild, forget what you know about Skyward Sword, you know, not even Skyward Sword, Ocarina of Time, forget all you know about that. The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword literally had the most emotional Link out of all the Links. You saw this man get angry, get sad, get ready for battle, stern, stoic, but yet happy and ready to go. He was the most expressive out of all the Links when it comes to the Legend of Zelda series. And that is one candle that no no one could fight when it comes to the Zelda series. Maybe Breath of the Wild too, because, you know, considering that Breath of the Wild already happened and Link already was the royal knight of Zelda. He already has history with Zelda. He had to remember it in Breath of the Wild, but in Breath of the Wild 2, going forward, he already knows all that jazz. He is once again himself. So maybe, just maybe, he'll be able to express himself a lot better than what we saw in Breath of the Wild, and maybe rival that of Skyward Sword. But according to Zelda's journal, you know, Link held himself in because he knew the duties he had when it came to being the hero chosen by legend. But in Skyward Sword, that's when the legend itself began. Link, Zelda, the Triforce, Hyrule was not even established by that time. The Master Sword was not even created. It was known as the prototype, the Goddess Sword, that housed the Spirit Fire. Ganon was not even a thing when it came to Skyward Sword. It set the boundaries. It set everything we had to know and had to put together when it came to the Zelda series. I mean, come on, like Zelda had the Goddess Harp, which turned out to be the same harp that Sheikah used in Ocarina of Time. Wild. And speaking of Ocarina of Time, you know, there are theories, and we're going to go over that. There are theories. So far, it's not confirmed. And those theories have even been referenced in Zelda books, in which time shift stones have the power over time, and time shift stones are blue. So it could be possible that the Ocarina of Time itself, you know, with the power over time, was made from time shift stones. From where we saw it, that is right, Skyward Sword. And let me not get started on the Hyrulean shield. If y'all didn't know, if y'all are into the Legend of Zelda, if y'all didn't know when it came to Skyward Sword, the Legend of Zelda, all that good jazz, Link rides a very special red bird. And on the Hyrulean shield, it has a red bird. Where do you think that came from? Skyward Sword is so great. I love Skyward Sword. Holy shit. And the combat is so precise when it comes to using the Wiimote. And a lot of people sandbag the combat and whatnot, you know, with the precise, you know, sword slashes, and even the bombs where you had to do either bomb throws or bomb bowling. Some people sandbagged it. You know what I say? You did not have enough space away from your TV, away from your Wii sensor bar, away from the console itself. With the right amount of space, you have to, like, you know, consider your position and stuff. Skyward Sword is such an optimal game, and that's the root of a lot of people's problems with the game. You know, oh man, like the motion controls suck. No, they don't. To this day, I have not had a problem with the motion controls of Skyward Sword because I knew how to position myself. Man, and that is why I constantly have the need, the want, in order to have Skyward Sword HD on the Nintendo Switch. We had the Wind Waker HD on the Wii U. We had Twilight Princess HD on the Wii U. Bring those two to the Switch. Nintendo, I know it ain't hard. You brought other games that were on the Wii U to the Switch already. I know it ain't hard considering your assets and everything, considering the Zelda series. Bring those games to the Switch. And bring Skyward Sword to the Switch. Because if you guys didn't know, when it came to messing around and understanding the graphics of Breath of the Wild, because the Breath of the Wild was the first true, which is hilarious, the first true Zelda game to be in HD, right? That was the first Zelda game to be in HD, and they had to have a lot of tinkering when it comes to the graphics and stuff. And they experimented with the Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and yes, oh yeah, Skyward Sword. And we have pictures of what Skyward Sword possibly could look like in HD. And I'm saying right now, the way Wind Waker looks in HD, bro, give me Skyward Sword in HD. I would love that. Let's get it. Man, that would be the optimal adventure. Skyward Sword was such a breakaway when it comes to the Legend of Zelda series that I felt it was the right shakeup, the right thing, the right oomph that the Zelda series needed in order to not really reshape its identity, but let you guys know that its identity is not, completely set on, okay, you clear 3 dungeons, get the Master Sword, clear 5 or 6 more dungeons, and then you reach the boss again, and all that good jazz. Skyward Sword helped shape the notion that Zelda is not really about that. But considering everything that happened with Skyward Sword, that it wasn't open world and all that good jazz, the Nintendo team listens. They definitely listen when it comes to the Zelda games and whatnot. They listened after Twilight Princess. They said, shake up the Zelda formula. They gave us Skyward Sword. A lot of people didn't really like Skyward Sword, and they're like, we want open world, and they listened. And it was thanks to that feedback that allowed us to get The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. And this is a notion that I'm gonna say multiple times in the stream that you guys need to understand. Breath of the Wild is an amazing game, the highest selling Zelda game of all time. My favorite Zelda game right now, and such a great adventure. And I still play it to this day. I have so many hours logged into The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. But you need to understand this. Skyward Sword had to walk in order for Breath of the Wild to run. Y'all need to understand that. Never forget that. That is an irrevocable truth. Is my camera lagging out? I feel my camera's lagging out. Is my hype too much for the 5th dimension to handle? Let's get it. I mean, it says it's 60 frames per second. That's fine. But, honestly, Skyward Sword was so great. Let me tell you, this Skyward Sword's release was honestly, a big advent before my YouTube career, leading into my YouTube career, where this is what I decided I wanted to do, content creation and whatnot, and me following everything when it comes to Skyward Sword. I followed every interview, everything I could find, every type of trailer, picture, everything. I followed it from back in the day when Skyward Sword was first revealed in 2010. Rephrase. 2009, when Nintendo unveiled that first concept art of Link without a sword and Fi behind him. That was the first concept, and then people were able to they were able to instantly put 2 and 2 together. Oh, Fi is the Master Sword. Look, the grasses around her legs, the crystal in her beings, the color, all that good jazz. Misclick just subscribed for 15 months at tier 1. We out here talking about my favorite game. Let's go! Y'all need to understand. Skyward Sword shaped so much of my identity going into content creation, and honestly is one of my favorite Zelda games. You already know, number 3, right? And it was thanks to Skyward Sword, my attention to detail. Of course, I paid attention to all Zelda games, and I was a Nintendo nut back in the day, trying to find everything about Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, all that. I saw the Space World thing when it comes to the Wind Waker reveal, and the Space World 2000 Zelda thing. So when it came to Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess, I kept my eyes glued to everything. And I finally got the game, and I played it, and everything just came out Millhouse. It was so magical. Honestly, going into Twilight Princess, I wanted Twilight Princess to be the game to dethrone Ocarina of Time, in my opinion. But going into Twilight Princess, as much as I love the game, and I know a lot of people love Twilight Princess, it just for me, it had too many faults. It had too many flaws, right? It tried so hard to be Ocarina of Time, but stumbled in many aspects, right? So I felt Zelda really needed that shakeup. Skyward Sword came along, and Skyward Sword definitely was it, in my opinion. The music, it was orchestrated. The music was composed and orchestrated by the same team. Of course, the Zelda team led the way, but it was composed and orchestrated by the same team that did the Super Mario Galaxy games. And I'm like, bro, this is lit, right? So when it comes to Skyward Sword, it really helped me gain that drive to want to do Zelda videos and whatnot. A lot of people know me for Smash Bros. A lot of people know me for Kingdom Hearts, but of course a lot of people do know me for Zelda, right? And it was thanks to that journey that was spun off, that journey that was helped get cultivated from the release and playability of Skyward Sword. It was thanks to that journey I was able to get into contact with Nintendo and get sent a Switch and review Breath of the Wild before release. All of that came full circle. That was honestly one of the epitomes of my careers on YouTube. Like ever. That was one of the epitomes on my career of YouTube. And all that honestly was thanks to my understanding, my playtime, my love for Skyward Sword. And man, oh man, so many theories when it comes to the overall Zelda series going forward from Skyward Sword to Breath of the Wild just went nuts. Back in the day when it was called Zelda Wii U, I used to call Skyward Sword Zelda Wii. Man, it was crazy, right? And you can automatically see in Breath of the Wild, it has so many concept, you know, I would say concept connections to Skyward Sword, where we have the goddess Hylia all over the place. The goddess Hylia was a thing that was shown off in Skyward Sword, but the name Hylia itself was something that we knew of since Ocarina of Time with Lake Hylia. We were like, Lake Hylia, what does that mean? What is Hylia? You know, we are Hylians. We live in Hyrule. We are Hylians. The tribe is known as Hylians, but we are known as the, you know, our what do you call it? Not our tribe name, but our, I would say, I am brain farting so much, but under the government of Hyrule, we are Hyruleans, right? That is, you know, like Zoras are Hyruleans, Gorons are Hyruleans. Technically, Korkiris are Hyruleans. The only people that weren't Hyruleans by the time of Ocarina of Time was the Gerudo, and then that's where Ganondorf rolled up and is like, hey king, guess what? I pledge my loyalty to you. Don't worry, you don't have to worry about a thing. The Gerudos are part of this nation. We welcome you to the desert of the west. We want to be Hyruleans, right? So there was a difference between Hyruleans and Hylians, right? And the group, the tribe known as, you know, Hylians with Lake Hylia and stuff, it really wasn't put into perspective until Skyward Sword. And then that whole goddess Hylia thing with the statue and everything, T to a T, was brought into Breath of the Wild. That really makes you wonder. Skyward Sword was the first game in the chronology of Zelda. And yet the goddess Hylia, I mean, of course, retroactively, was not in any of the Zelda games after, timeline-wise, Skyward Sword. But then when it came to Breath of the Wild, and suddenly everyone wants to worship Hylia again, when everyone was worshipping Din, Nehru, Faror, and, you know, other gods such as the goddess of the sand and Jabu Jabu. But Hylia has always been a thing, and as we all know, Zelda is Hylia reincarnated, the blood of the goddess that flows within all princesses of Hyrule. However, it gets thinned out with each new generation. That, along with the spirit of the hero, gets tied to the curse of the demon, the hate of the demon, the hate of Demise, in which they will wander a blood-soaked future, blood-soaked ocean of darkness for all eternity. How can you not put respect on Skyward Sword's name? It gave us the origin of Ganondorf. It gave us the origin of the hero. It gave us the origin of Zelda. It gave us the origin of Hyrule. Everything, all things in between. Dang, Gorons was in Skyward Sword. Like, damn. Gorons predated Korkiri. Gorons predated Zoras. Gorons predated the tribe known as Gerudos. But one kicker you guys need to understand is that the term Gerudo existed in Skyward Sword, derived from the Gerudo dragonfly. And I'm like, What? So, I mean, maybe the dragonfly is very important to the identity of the Gerudo. And then let us talk about the teeth. Let's talk about that teeth, right? Let's talk about that teeth. That Groose is basically a proto-Ganondorf. Y'all ain't ready for that conversation, are y'all? You guys are not ready for that conversation. Red hair, derived from a bird, yellow eyes, tan skin. You guys are not ready for that conversation, huh? We had it! We had the Trinity in Skyward Sword. Link, Zelda, and Groose. They were all there. They were all there from the beginning. The Groose is loose. Y'all not ready for that conversation. Whoo-wee! But the Legend of Zelda brought so many things to the table. So much things when it comes to our understanding of the Zelda series. When it comes to the Door of Time, time travel, the Gate of Time, the Master Sword on how we know as it today. Link helped forge the Master Sword from the Goddess Sword by purifying it with the three, flames of the goddesses, right? When it comes to the goddess Feora, the flame of courage, right? It helped increase the attack power of the Goddess Sword into the Goddess Longsword and gave us that, familiar crest when it comes to the sword meeting the pommel of, the Master Sword. But it was still the Goddess Sword, right? The Goddess Longsword gained the wisdom from the Flame of Wisdom in order to know itself as a wise sword, to know all, to have an understanding of the world. In order to get, I would say, not brain power, but cognition. In order to get that sentience. Of course, Fi resided in the sword, but Fi would have to go to sleep at one point. It needed the wisdom of the Flame of Wisdom, the blue flame, in order to keep that type of cognition, in order to choose its owner, in order to recognize its owner as a Master Sword in their life. And then we come to the Flame of Power, Din's Fire, literally Din's Fire, right? And it was imbued into the Goddess White Sword, which turned it into the Master Sword, which gave it the white light. It increased its attack power, but gave it the white light. The light it needed in order to repel evil. The sword, the blade of evil's bane, right? And then we come to Link, fully understanding his destiny as one who will be able to control the Triforce, getting the virtues of power, wisdom, and courage. The signal on the back of his hand. And of course, the final blessing by Zelda herself, aka the goddess Hyrulean, in order to turn the Master Sword into the true Master Sword, in order to get the insignia, the stamp of the Triforce onto the blade, so that it is forever tied to the spirit of the hero, in which Link created in Skyward Sword. Put some respect on that game's name. How dare you? How dare you? How dare you ever think that Skyward Sword deserves any less than your utmost respect when it comes to a Legend of Zelda game? And it gave us Demise, the king of demons. This man got sealed as the imprisoned by the goddess Hyrulean in order to rise up again as King Demise when it finally stole the soul of Zelda, aka the soul of Hyrulean, to regain its true form. And then we find out the biggest thing about Demise and Girahim's relationship, which I might add, Girahim is honestly the best character that Zelda has had in a very, very long time, right? And it turns out Girahim is Fi's counterpart in being the sword for Demise. Let's talk about that for a little bit. Fi as the Master Sword is calm, albeit cold, calculating, robotic, always serving her master, in which she goes out with a very stern, stoic appearance, as if she was a machine. You Your batteries are low, Master. Make sure to change up the batteries in your Wii Remote Plus. Very calm, very cold, very collective, machine-like. That's Fi within the Master Sword. Girahim within Demise's sword, which I like to call the Fell Master Sword. He is very extravagant. He is very flamboyant. He loves to get his emotions in a fever pitch. He lets you know what's on his mind in a very fashionable, great, flammable nature. He loves to let you know what's going on. He is Girahim, Lord Girahim, the demon lord that presides over the realm of the surface. That is the contrast between Girahim and Fi. Fi is, yes, master. I am the Master Sword. This enemy does this. Make sure to charge your batteries for your Wii Remote Plus. We must defeat the demons and recover Zelda. While Girahim's like, oh, I will make you suffer so much that your ears will bleed out into deafening silence by the screams caused by me beating you to a bloody pulp. But everything is nice and rainbows once my Lord Demise has conquered the world. This game is amazing! Oh my god. And it's funny because we actually don't know if Demise is dead. Demise is deaded. Demise is hella deaded. But we don't know what happened to Girahim. Girahim, as the sword, just simply faded. Did Girahim die? Did Girahim, abandon its master in order to try and recover itself for a game, for a story, way later in the chronology, in order to bring back his king, Demise? Is Girahim just like playing a sitting duck? That's definitely one thing to consider. But overall, Skyward Sword just added so much good stuff to the Zelda series. It added so much fodder for theories, lore, and the understanding of, where the Triforce came from, who guarded the Triforce, what became of the Triforce when it came to sealing it off into the separate temples and the sages, each derived from a certain element and stuff. And it's funny because even though Skyward Sword is the first game in the chronology of Zelda, and of course the manga does not count, the manga is not canon, right? It's funny because there are things when it comes to the ancient battle, the identity of the elements and the sages that are derived from the elements that we see hints of in Skyward Sword that, tell us of something that existed before that of Skyward Sword. And Skyward Sword already is super primordial when it comes to the overall Zelda series. Hyrule doesn't exist, the kingdom doesn't exist, Zelda's not our princess, Zelda just became flesh and blood as Hyrulean. But I would definitely like to see a story that is told before that of Skyward Sword, when it tells us of the original hero and the goddess Hyrulean, which is, kind of like referenced in the manga, but the manga's not canon. But something I do want to state when it comes to the relation of the original hero and theories relating to Skyward Sword is actually a theory I made about the Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword way back in the day before Breath of the Wild came out, and the theory is called a Legend of Zelda theory, Hyrulean's Chosen Knight, the Chosen Knight theory, right? And that really gets boiling when it comes to time travel. And man, time travel is so sick to mess around with. And that leads to another theory that I want to talk about when it comes to another separate complete timeline after Skyward Sword. So, as we all know, in Skyward Sword, the students of the Knight Academy, they do a type of ritual, a type of, event when they try to recreate the legend of the goddess Hyrulean passing on her blessing to her chosen knight in order to fight evil the Demon King, Demise, all that good jazz. If you read the Skyward Sword manga, that's basically the case in point of what is going on, right? So that's what in Skyward Sword, that's what happens. Zelda recreates the legend because it's her turn to play the part of the goddess, and then the other kids, the male students, they compete for the chance to be the chosen knight, and then of course Link wins. And then the whole thing happens where Zelda gives her the sail cloth to Link as part of the blessing that's passed down from the goddess to the chosen knight. Now here's the big thing. That is of course trying to recreate a legend that they know of within Skyward Sword, right? But later on in the game, we find out not only is Zelda is indeed Hyrulean reincarnated, but Zelda does go back into the past 10,000 years, like eons, whatever the fuck. You know, she goes back into the past and seals herself in order to seal Demise, right? In order to establish her role as Hyrulean, in order to keep Demise at bay. Way back in the day, you know, Demise was just sealed, right? Because she is Hyrulean. Link goes back into the past as well in order to help her out, right? And it is in that past that Link clashes with Demise on behalf of Zelda being her chosen knight, aka Hyrulean. And the theory is that that event in Skyward Sword is literally the event of legend that the kids in real time in the future are trying to recreate. Zelda and Link are trying to recreate the legend, but later in the game you find out they go back in the past and do the legend. That is the legend they're trying to create because they make it themselves. And that's the whole funky thing about time travel. Link, you know, heads or tails about it, Link in Skyward Sword not only was the original Link that created the spirit of the hero, but he was also the original chosen knight that faced Demise in legend, because he went back to the past to be that legend. That's crazy. That's crazy. Think about that, right? So that's one half of the whole theory scenario when it comes to the Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, right? That's one thing. That's the one theory I have. The second theory I had is that, of course, at the end of Ocarina of Time, when Link defeats Ganondorf, right? He goes back, he doesn't go back to the past quite yet, but he lets Zelda know, like, you know, they meet up as adults, and then Zelda sends Link back to the past in order to relive his childhood. Link leaves behind the adult timeline, but goes back to a child in order to warn Zelda about Ganondorf and what he's about to do, using the Triforce of Courage as proof that he brought back from the future, right? And then that led to the child timeline. And then we all know about the what if scenario that leads into the downfall timeline, right? That's the timeline split about Link being in the future, but then going back into the past in order to change the future for the better, right? Nintendo has a lot of room to work with if they decide to not go with the established timeline in which the unified timeline, Skyward Sword, Skyward Sword, Minish Cap, Four Swords, Ocarina of Time, split, you know, and then adult timeline, child timeline, and downfall timeline. If they don't want to go with that, they can easily go with another timeline split that was caused by Skyward Sword. Because Link did go back into the past, thanks to the Gate of Time, as we just said. He went back into the past in order to defeat and kill Demise in the past. Although he already killed Demise as the imprisoned in the future using the Triforce. And if we're dealing with multiverse theory, right? The future he was already a part of when it comes to using the Triforce and destroying Demise, that cannot be changed. That cannot be altered, right? Because he still goes back to the future, which is intact, and then he meets up with Groose, Zelda, Old Lady Impa, and then goes off, and then that's the start of the Zelda series, or whatnot, and they go off in peace, and then they create Minish Cap, Four Swords, Adventures, Ocarina of Time, all that good jazz. But he did go back into the past to kill Demise in the past, and Demise can't exist as the imprisoned in the future to be killed as the imprisoned in the future if he was already killed in the past as Demise by Link in order to save Zelda. Which creates, ladies and gentlemen, another universe within the multiverse theory. So that past that Link left behind in which he killed Demise can indeed be another timeline. In which, that's what I like to call the timeline of prosperity. In which Demise is killed, and then Link and Zelda don't exist in that past. So, there is no one to follow when it comes to the curse of hatred and the curse of the demon. The curse of the hatred and the curse of the demon transcends time itself, as Demise, in his log, says a demon that conquers time itself. That curse follows Link and Zelda into the timeline they went to when they escaped the past through the gate of time. Link and Zelda does not exist in that timeline in which Link destroyed Demise in the past, which could lead to a timeline of prosperity in which the Triforce is there, but Link is not, Zelda is not, Demise is not, the curse is not. It could lead to a true prosperous timeline in which they don't have to deal with all that BS of Ganondorf, the malice, the curse, the ever waging war over the Triforce. Indeed. Skyward Sword is such a good game, right? Skyward Sword really gave us the identity of where the, not really where the Sheikahs came from, but why the Sheikahs decide to follow the royal family and serve the royal family, despite everything that's happened and despite the creation of the Yiga tribe in Breath of the Wild. As we know it, in Skyward Sword, literally, the Sheikah tribe are agents of the goddess. You know, as we know it in the current Zelda timeline, you know, they serve the royal family. They serve the royal family as the shadow folk, those that exist in the shadow. You know, they're not knights, they're not military, but they are the secret service of the royal family of Hyrule. We now know why, and that is because the Sheikah in reality are the agents of the goddess Hyrulean, that pledged to serve the goddess. And then what happens? Hyrulean becomes Zelda, and Zelda starts the royal bloodline of Hyrule, the royal family of Hyrule, and they are bound to serve Hyrulean in any form, in any blood form, and that's why the Sheikah serve the royal family, despite all the bumpy rides they went through when it comes to Breath of the Wild and the mangas and all that good jazz. I mean, like, yeesh, you know, the Sheikahs really do get the shitty end of the stick sometimes. And then there's so many other things, you know, like I said before, when it comes to the time shift stones, you know, possibly creating the Ocarina of Time, and then the ancient robots. A lot of people, and this is definitely something that could be understood when it comes to the Sheikah and, you know, their tribe relating to the goddess Hyrulean, being agents of the goddess. They've probably been back and forth, not even back and forth, but straight up, you know, living on the surface world, you know, building their technology, learning their wisdom, understanding all there is when it comes to everything mystical and magical about the Zelda series and the chronology and the lore and whatnot. The ancient robots, the way that they're designed and whatnot, although Lanayru says that they, like, he gave them life and whatnot, and Lanayru, think about this, Lanayru is derived from Lanayru is derived from Nehru, who? The goddess of wisdom. The wisdom of the Sheikah. Blue, the blue energy. You know, don't let, you know, Pharaon being blue, you know, Pharaon is green, Pharaoh, courage, all that good jazz. Don't let that confuse you. You know, we got, you know, the three primary colors, red, blue, yellow, all that good jazz. But the Nehru, goddess of wisdom, all that good jazz. The Neru helped create, the dragon helped create the robots. The Dragon of Wisdom, Goddess of Wisdom, Blue. Think about that for a second when it comes to the ancient technology, the Sheikah technology that is derived from ancient furnaces and that blue flame, that blue fire. That's right, the Sheikah probably derived their technology from the ancient robots that were built by Lanayru, right? All that really boils down into connection and into consideration. Literally, Skyward Sword busts the Zelda series open when it comes to all of this lore and how it could explain certain things, and you know, all that understanding and whatnot. Because one thing that's so beautiful about the Legend of Zelda series is that how it is able to, you know, create and talk and tell you lore through the world building that is, you know, everything that you see in the Zelda games. Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild, right? And Skyward Sword is way too important for it to be ignored when it comes to the overall Zelda series and whatnot. And personally, I have so much fun with that game. I have so much fun with its identity, what it does, what it means for it. You know, of course, it does leave a lot to be desired when it comes to, you know, the prospect of towns, of an open world. But, you know, it was really, it really drove home the identity, because this is one thing that I feel a lot of people, it goes over a lot of people's heads when it comes to Skyward Sword, right? Is that Skyward Sword, in its whole identity, in its complete mass, was that its identity was completely built off the fact that this was the first Zelda game in the chronology. That, you know, everything you see in the game is going to be primitive. Everything you see in this game is going to be before everything you've known of the Zelda series. You know, they have to, you know, help understand the land. You have to help understand the people. You know, there's not going to be a lot of cities or whatnot. There's going to probably be a lot of, you know, tribes that you see that could possibly evolve into tribes that you see, like, you know, jeez, I'm brain frying so hard. But that water tribe of those weird squid fish, they could possibly evolve into Zora. And then the tribe of those weird forest dwellers that could possibly, you know, evolve into Kokiri or Koroks and all that good jazz. It's just, you know, all of that needs to really be put into perspective when it comes to Skyward Sword and, you know, how people perceive the game. And honestly, if anyone really, you know, like legitimately doesn't like Skyward Sword for whatever reason, you know, I really doubt anyone dislikes Skyward Sword for its story. You know, I feel a lot of people just end up disliking Skyward Sword for the fact that it's not open, it's not a big expansive open world, and that it's very linear, and of course the notion of motion controls. But I feel that if you give it a good gentleman's try, you're gonna end up loving this game. And honestly, man, you know, when it comes to Super Mario 64, Sunshine, Galaxy 1 and 2, or 3D World Deluxe and all that stuff, honestly, me, you know, as a Zelda fan, I am willing to, you know, if I had a chance, I'm willing to opt out and put all of that on the back burner in order to get, you know, Skyward Sword HD on the Switch. Easily. Like, you know, Skyward Sword, you know, it being on the Switch is a long time coming, and I really do hope that possibly, maybe, we could see it at the end of this year, or maybe even next year, because, I mean, Skyward Sword did come out in 2011. It was supposed to come out in 2010, but it got delayed, as all Zelda games do. And, you know, 2011 will be the 10th anniversary, the 10-year anniversary of Skyward Sword, and I would definitely like to see Skyward Sword either on the Switch this year or next year. HD, let's fucking get it. I would love that, honestly. And then I see in the chat that people disliked the game because it was linear. But then you have to understand, you know, like Skyward Sword, I'm not going to use the word suffer, but Skyward Sword, you know, it was linear for a reason when it came to the Wii and the Wii's identity, in the same vein as Metroid Prime 3. Metroid Prime 3 was definitely more linear when it comes to Metroid Prime 1 and 2, right? But it still followed Metroid rules in terms of like backtracking or discovering things that happened before. But when it comes to the prior two games, it was a lot more linear. And that was because of the motion controls and what it was, you know, what the Wii's identity was meant to be and whatnot. And Skyward Sword, you know, its identity was still derived from that, you know, idea. And I'm not going to hold it against it because I have massive understanding of where Skyward Sword came from and what they were trying to do with it. And the game overall was just immensely fun. The combat was all over the place, and it just there was a lot of condensation. There was a lot of condensation when it comes to the elements that Zelda is known for when it comes to Skyward Sword. But it was done in such a, I would feel, a perfect way. It was condensed in such a perfect way that it worked for what Skyward Sword was trying to do, right? And despite it being linear, it was still a very, very meaty adventure in which you are able to discover a lot of things and look for a lot of things, and you know, like the playtime was still pretty substantial and whatnot. And then of course you could, you know, tackle again in hero mode, and hero mode was hero mode was no walk in the park when it comes to Skyward Sword. Oh man, and I really like that. I enjoy that challenge a lot, man. I played Skyward Sword, the original hero mode, front, back, all around and whatnot. Man, my Wii is somewhere like locked into the crevices of all my, like, you know, moving packing boxes somewhere in my bedroom or something like that. But I play Skyward Sword on my Wii U. But on my Wii file, man, my Wii file when it comes to Skyward Sword, it was all over the place, you know, up, down, all around, just done. Just done. Everything. And honestly, I would try my hardest in order to break my high scores when it comes to Lineru's boss challenge. Woo, I would try so hard. And then the only way for you to fight Demise in that boss challenge is if you play the game in hero mode. Because if you play the game in hero mode, that tells the game, hey, listen, you played the game once already, so you're able to fight Demise. And I did that in hero mode, and I'm like, I'm gonna smack-a-doodle this guy up as fast as I can. I'm pretty sure my record is around like around the range of 2 minutes or a little under 2 minutes when it comes to beating Demise. Man, like the most trouble I have when it comes to the timing of Skyward Sword, when it comes to bosses, I think it would have to be Koloktos, because, you know, you have to, like, you know, slice open Koloktos' heart piece with the swords that he drops. But of course, as soon as you slice open with the swords you drop his sword. If you have the true Master Sword powered up all the way from hero mode, you know, you drop the sword and you stab, and it's all good, right? And man, you know, we just got raided by the Garden of Light with a party of 8. What's good? Welcome to the 5th dimension. And that's what we like to do when it comes to the 5th dimension. Talk about stories, lore, characters, theories, and the future of Skyward Sword and all the other games in between and whatnot. But man, oh man, Skyward Sword honestly did wonders for the Zelda series. Man, like I said before in the stream, Skyward Sword had to walk in order for Breath of the Wild to run. Because, you know, when it comes to the 3D Zelda games, you need to understand this. When it comes to the 3D Zelda games, we start with Ocarina of Time. And Ocarina of Time started with its own engine, the Ocarina of Time engine, right? And then Majora's Mask ran on the Ocarina of Time engine, but then of course needed the expansion pass in order to increase 4 megabytes to 8 megabytes in order to give that graphical fidelity back on the N64. Right? And then we come to Wind Waker, which ran on a heavily modified Ocarina of Time engine, right? And I'm like, oh damn, alright, okay, alright, right? And then we come to Twilight Princess, which ran on a heavily modified Wind Waker engine, and I'm like, okay, you guys really going. And then we go to Skyward Sword, which ran on a heavily modified Twilight Princess engine. And I'm like, Nintendo, what are you doing? Stop! Right? And then we come to Breath of the Wild. And then Breath of the Wild, for the first time when it comes to 3D Zelda games, Breath of the Wild for the first time ran on a new 3D Zelda engine, right? But as you can see from Link's movements, his sword stripes, and all that stuff, they still carry over assets from Skyward Sword. Although Breath of the Wild ran on a new engine, which they had to develop for forever, because, I mean, it was falling apart with the physics engine and everything like that, leading up to the supposed release in 2015 and whatnot, they still grabbed assets and used assets when it comes to character movement and how Link attacks from Skyward Sword. Like, you know, literally Link's slashes with the Master Sword or a one-handed sword, he's like, and then spin around. Those are legit movement assets that are derived from and modified from Skyward Sword, and you can see that right away. So Nintendo loves to reuse, reduce, recycle. But it just goes to show how much of Skyward Sword really is in Breath of the Wild, and probably will be in Breath of the Wild 2. But I would like to see if Breath of the Wild 2 tries to shape its own identity, because I did release a video today. If you guys haven't seen it, it is my return of the demons theory video when it comes to the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, right? And I'm using that notion, that idea from what we saw from Skyward Sword. You know, obviously Breath of the Wild takes aspects from Skyward Sword concepts and whatnot. And in Breath of the Wild 2, we have Link and Zelda exploring the depths of Hyrule, right? The depths of Hyrule, the crevices, the underground. Does that sound familiar to you? Yes, it does, because in Skyward Sword, that's where the demons come from. That is where the demons come from, right? And if Link and Zelda are exploring the realm, the area in which demons can arise from, can come from, that really spells the idea of, you know, demons possibly being able to return in Breath of the Wild 2. Especially if, as my theory suggests, that Ganondorf, as we see in Breath of the Wild 2, is not only being sealed, but also acts as a seal to the demonic realm, to the underworld. And, you know, everything's underground. The Hyrule Castle raises from the ground, and that can open up a crevice, that can open up a crack in the earth for demons to, like, you know, mosey on up to the surface once again. That's crazy and whatnot. And I see it in chat. I really want Breath of the Wild 2 to have actually different dungeons. If my theories or my calculations were to, you know, relay anything of the sort, then it could be possible that, you know, we have Breath of the Wild 2 dungeons. And this could be dark. And, you know, they did say that Breath of the Wild 2 is going to be dark. You know, Breath of the Wild 2 could have dungeons derived from demons that exist in the underworld, that could either have been an ally of Demise or to be derived of those who try to usurp him. Because although the Demon King Ganondorf, the Demon Thief Ganondorf, exists in the surface, the underworld is still without a Demon King. And I feel that demonic struggle in order to become the new Demon King could be something of a concept that could be explored in Breath of the Wild 2. And that would be a great way to shake up the game and add new enemies that weren't in the original Breath of the Wild in Breath of the Wild 2. And it will give great reason to why they're there and why they didn't exist in Breath of the Wild. Because they're demons that come up from the ground that didn't exist on the surface. Oh, man. Excuse me. But yeah. Time for that Red Dead Redemption. Technically, Red Deads are not demons. They are the undead. Reanimated corpses. And then when it comes to Breath of the Wild, I want to see enemies from Skyward Sword and Ocarina of Time to be back in Breath of the Wild 2. Give me Stalfos, give me Stal Lords, give me undead enemies like undead bokoblins and whatnot, give me Redeads, give me Dead Hands, give me Skulltulas. All of it, and give it to me. We don't even have a Deku Baba. We don't even have Deku Babas in Breath of the Wild. Let me get some demonic ass Deku Babas in Breath of the Wild 2. Let's go. Come on. It is straight up a crime for us to not see like Deku Babas and whatnot within Breath of the Wild 2. But I feel Breath of the Wild 2 will definitely, you know, help us out. But then we have to really understand, you know, the possible connections when it comes to Breath of the Wild 2, and why Link and Zelda are exploring the underground. I don't want to assume that, I mean, of course, Breath of the Wild takes place like more than 10,000 years after whatever last Zelda game, you know, took place in that era. It's literally eons ahead of any other Zelda game of any timeline or whatnot. But at the end of the day, the goddess Hylia is still prevalent within the world of Hyrule. So I don't want to assume that the tales and the lore of Skyward Sword is completely lost from Breath of the Wild, because when you look at it, Zelda, when it comes to her trying to, you know, awaken her power, her sealing power, in order to seal the Calamity Ganon away, when she goes and prays at the springs, which once again, the springs are something from Skyward Sword, she wears a dress that is very much reminiscent of the dress that Skyward Sword Zelda wore in order to awaken herself to the identity of being the reincarnation of the goddess Hylia, right? The bracelets, the neck, you know, design and whatnot. So it's very much derived and very much there when it comes to those connections. So I don't want to assume that everything isn't lost when it comes to Skyward Sword and how it could be connected to Breath of the Wild. But I do want to explore more aspects that, you know, Skyward Sword touched upon, but I feel wasn't brave enough to really go into deeper lore into. Because I mean, all we know when it comes to Demise and the Curse of Demise and demons and stuff is that, oh, there was an ancient battle that took place. The goddess Hylia had to save the humans by carving out a fissure of the land, sending it skyward in order to save the humans, and then she banded with the other tribes on the land in order to defeat Demise and his horde of demons and monsters, right? That's all we basically know. And then Demise shows up, and then Fi tells us that, oh, he's the source of all monsters, he conquers time himself, he's the king of all demons, Demise, the demon king, and he was like the biggest, baddest dude you can ever fight, whatever. And you know, Girahim really wanted to revive him. He was in prison, but other than that, you know, we literally got surface value understanding of Demise, the war, Girahim, and the identity of demons and the Demon King and possibly the Demon Throne, right? We all got a surface level understanding of that. And I really feel that Breath of the Wild 2 can go deep into exploring that those ideas that Skyward Sword basically skimmed over. Because at the end of Breath of the Wild 1, when it comes to Zelda letting us know the identity of Ganon, or Calamity Ganon, which is like, Ganon was born of dark past. And then, you know, it was telling us about a curse of rage and hatred that's constantly reincarnated time and time again, and that's what Ganon or Ganondorf is. And eventually he became to identify himself as the Calamity Ganon, and that's what Ganon is now. But then, Lord and behold, we find out in Breath of the Wild 2 that Ganondorf actually exists somewhere beneath the ground. And a lot of people got confused, and they looked at Ganondorf, and they're like, I don't know, man, that looks like it could be Demise, because I admit it, he does definitely seem to channel, you know, that Demise energy when it comes to long flowing hair, and then you see the silhouette, and he's like really buff and big, and then when his eyes light up, he has the X, you know, kind of like the X scar on Demise. And how did he get that? That's not explained and whatnot. So I really hope that Breath of the Wild 2 really dives into all of those subjects when it comes to Skyward Sword, its understanding of the Zelda series, and how it could help shape what we know about the Zelda series into Breath of the Wild 2. But ladies and gentlemen, we had to start this stream late, and we're gonna have to end it now. It's currently midnight my time, but it's been a great time having you guys here for the 5th dimension when it comes to the Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. Don't worry, we only spent like a good hour talking about this, but I am going to definitely talk about Skyward Sword again, possibly with some guests, on another episode of the 5th dimension. I'll hope to see you guys next Friday, sharp 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the next episode of the 5th dimension. Next episode is going to be episode 15. Alright guys, so until the next one, this has been HMK. Remember, be brave, dive deep, and enter the 5th dimension. Till next time, I'll check you guys later.